Viewer contributions make local programming possible on WNIN. Become a member of WNIN with your contribution so we can continue to make this programming available. Visit WNIN.org and click on the donate button.
Historic Veterans Memorial Coliseum has been a landmark in downtown Evansville for over 100 years. We'll learn more about its rich history and plans for the future. That's next on WNIN Newsmakers. Welcome to WNIN Newsmakers. I'm Noah Alata, the Chief Communications Officer for the University of Evansville. The Veterans Memorial Coliseum was built in 1916 and was the primary event venue for Evansville before Roberts Stadium was built in the 1950s. Here to talk about the Coliseum and its importance to the city is Jill Ann Hahn, Vanderburgh County Councilor at Large. Thanks so much for joining us today, Jill.
Absolutely. Thank you for letting me be here.
Absolutely. First, wanted to talk to you in regards to just kind of an overview of this renovation project that's going on at the Coliseum right now.
Sure. Well, about 3 years ago, we recognized that the Soldiers and Sailors Coliseum was in need of some major renovations. And we were coming out of COVID, and we started having these ARPA dollars that were being provided by the federal government and that were given out during COVID. And we said, hey, why don't we try to look at how much money it would take to renovate this fine structure and get it back to what it was in its heyday. And so Vanderburgh County Commissioners and the Vanderburgh County, of course, we are the financial piece of it. We approved $6 million to be able to be awarded for that, those renovations. And through that came out the Veterans Preservation Funding. And so this group, of which I am the president, I was named the president by the commissioners so that we could begin preserving this building. And the past year and a half, we have been doing things that most of the public won't ever even get to see. We've put security on it, which it did not have any kind of formal security. We've been doing electrical. We've been doing some of the plumbing and the wiring, heating and air conditioning. So we got a brand new boiler system. And so some of those items, that costs $5.5 million. I don't think the public realizes how big of a structure the Coliseum actually is, because there is a complete basement under the footprint of the building itself. Plus, the Coliseum does have a second floor with additional buildings.
Now, I know we're going to learn more about the history of the Coliseum in just a moment, Jill, but I'm curious, why has the Coliseum been so important to Evansville and Vanderburgh County, historically speaking?
Sure. Well, that was the first venue of its kind in this area that held so many individuals. And back in its heyday in the 1920s, it held, in fact, we still have the newsreels where they would have the black and white speakeasies that they had a organ that we had to get rid of. Unfortunately, it had to be dismantled because the cost was going to be $1 to $2 million. But the good thing is that organ actually went to another event center up in Pittsburgh. And so this place held a key to a lot of community people's hearts. My own mother got to see the circus there when they actually had three-ring circuses. We have had all kinds of major famous artists, musicians, comedians that have come there. That was, as you said prior to this, before Roberts Stadium, that was the community place that people came and gathered and had dances and events and so forth like that.
So for viewers at home who might be asking, why is this such a priority right now? Right, we have the Ford Center.
Sure.
What do you tell those people at home who might be thinking, why is this a priority?
we don't make these kind of structures anymore like they did back in the day. It is an icon that has beautiful paintings inside that have masterpieces that could not be replicated. As you walk into the main foyer on the right is a room that was dedicated to the Grand Army of the Republic, which was very special in its day. And the men that served in those wars would actually meet in those in secret many times. On the left was the Spanish-American War Room. And these men this was their place that they could go. They could go talk and speak and talk about battles and what life was like on the battlefield. And so it continues to hold a special place because moving forward, the past few years, we've had Honor Flight. Honor Flight has held all of their dinners and their meeting places within that room. And there's been many high school dances that have been held. Wedding receptions have been held. So we want to bring that back because the floor in itself, if you take away all the seats and all the tables, you can put anywhere between 25 to 3,000 people. So it's really a very large venue that we want to bring back and bring the history, bring the decor back, and make it just as elegant as it once was.
You mentioned Honor Flight. You mentioned some of these dances as well. Anything else that the Coliseum is being utilized for now or perhaps could be in the future?
We're very hopeful that plays could be done here. We are going to be making it to where it has a full sound system, and the staging area is going to be just as wonderful as what the Victory may hold or what the Ford Center may have. And we're hoping that the Civic Theater can maybe bring their plays back to this area and make it possibly its permanent home. So, but other areas as well. We've already received some folks that are interested in bringing maybe some comedians, maybe having a competition for younger people's garage bands and utilizing it for that. We've had people talking about possibly arts and crafts festivals in there. Really it's endless as to what we could utilize this space for.
We'll be back with Vanderburgh County Councilor Jill Ann Hahn after viewing this short film that the Feel the History students at FJ Reitz produced about the history of the Veterans Memorial Coliseum.
If the Evansville Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Coliseum could talk, what would it say? During the time before the Ford Center and Roberts Stadium, when the people of Evansville came together for the biggest community gatherings and events, it was at Evansville's Memorial Coliseum. The Coliseum was erected as a tribute to the men of Vanderburgh County who fought in the Civil War and the Spanish-American Wars. First as the president of the Evansville Business Association and later as the mayor, Benjamin Bossy was the driving force in the building of the Coliseum. After clearing the site of several old buildings, the cornerstone of the 66,000 square foot facility was laid on May 9, 1916. On April 8, 1917, 3 days after America joined World War I, the Coliseum hosted a grand opening ceremony. The original construction cost over $180,000 in 1916, which would be the equivalent of over $5 million today. The neoclassical Coliseum was designed by Clifford Shotbell and Company and provided the community with its first modern facility for conventions and other public gatherings. The ceremonial aspect of the building was heightened by placing the structure directly on an axis with 4th Street in downtown Evansville. Rockport native George H. Honig created 2 heroic monuments that flank the entrance. The Spirit of 1865 on the left represents victory for the Union during the Civil War, and the Spirit of 1916, on the right, shows a reflection of the elderly veterans who fought in the war. The primary purpose for the Veterans Memorial Coliseum was to act as a meeting place for the veterans of two major American wars. With a room for the Grand Army of the Republic Civil War veterans and a room for the Spanish-American War veterans of Evansville, the Coliseum was a safe space for veterans to interact with each other. Game nights, Christmas parties, and much more were hosted by veterans for veterans at the Coliseum. In its youth, the Coliseum served as a meeting place for veterans and a rallying point for supporters of World War I. In 1921, it hosted one of the largest funerals in Evansville history for a very famous World War I veteran. In 1917, just 4 days before the Coliseum was officially established, the U.S. Senate voted in support of declaring war on Germany, thus thrusting the nation into the First World War. The nation rallied troops from all corners of the U.S., including Evansville's own James Bethel Gresham. James Gresham was born to Alice Bethel Gresham and Green Gresham in Kentucky on August 23, 1893. After the death of his father in 1900, James and his family moved to Evansville, where he attended Centennial School until he eventually joined the factory workforce to provide for his family. During the spring of 1914, James Gresham enlisted in the U.S. Army. Gresham was sent to El Paso to serve under the command of General John J. Pershing before being sent overseas when America joined the war effort. Gresham was shot and killed during a raid in France on November 3, 1917, becoming the first American to die in World War I. His memorial service was held on July 15, 1921, after his body was moved from the battlefield in France, where he was originally laid to rest, back to his hometown of Evansville. Just 1 year later, the Coliseum became the fitting site of another important memorial service. After the unexpected and untimely death of 47-year-old Benjamin Bossy, the Coliseum was host to an organ recital and memorial for the mayor after his death in April of 1922. About 1,500 people attended the service to pay their respects to the late mayor and remember the great things he had done for the city. Along with his major role in the construction of the Coliseum, Benjamin Bossy's accomplishments also included developing Garvin Park and Bossy Baseball Field, as well as building the first Evansville laboratory for influenza study and for modernizing the fire and police departments. Funeral services are far from the only memorable events that have been held at the Coliseum. In fact, the circus was held at the Coliseum until Roberts Stadium was eventually constructed in 1956. For many tri-staters, the Thanksgiving season wouldn't be complete without the annual Hottie Shrine Circus. Since 1933, generations of fans have been entertained by the daring and dramatic feats of trapeze artists or the hilarious antics of
I don't
clowns.
know if you've ever heard of Happy Kellums, but he was a clown. And he would take a broom, and of course they put the spotlight down, and he would sweep that spot. Mm-hmm. And of course they'd move the spot, so he'd run over and sweep that spot again. And so that was always fun, got a lot of laughs from the kids.
In the early years of the circus, the event was held in the downtown Coliseum. Admission tickets cost 10 cents, but despite the Depression, overflowing attendance forced the scheduling of performances during the entire week of Thanksgiving. By the early 1950s, the circus had been extended an additional week to account for the excess of attendees and lack of seating. The seating dilemma was finally solved with the building of Roberts Municipal Stadium in 1956, where the circus was held until 2011, when the stadium was demolished and the Ford Center was opened in downtown Evansville. Although the Coliseum stood proudly downtown as a figurehead of Evansville's architectural progress, events held in the building were still segregated. Prominent civil rights figure John M. Caldwell began his career pushing for desegregation of the Coliseum during the 1930s. His efforts, unfortunately, were unsuccessful.
One of the major figures in the Evansville civil rights story, John M. Caldwell, he was the first black man elected to office in Evansville. He's the first black person on the city council. When he gave an interview in the early 1970s reflecting on his civil rights career, and he saw the first acts of his civil rights career as being centered on the Coliseum.
Most performances by prominent black artists from the 1930s through the 1960s were followed by what were termed colored-only dances.
And one of the things that's kind of striking is that sometimes these artists who were black would play their concert, and then after the concert there would be a dance for black people, but all the white people would leave.
Eventually, the Civil Rights Act brought desegregation to the historic venue. The walls of the Evansville Coliseum have heard some of the greatest musical acts of the 20th century. The smaller stage allowed for the Coliseum to be a premier venue for up-and-coming artists of the times. The 50s brought diverse acts such as country legend Hank Williams Sr., blues icon B.B. King, rock pioneers Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, Buddy Holly, and the king of jazz himself, Louis Armstrong. The 1960s brought country music icons Johnny Cash and George Jones, among other notable acts, to the Coliseum. Thousands of fans were also drawn to the Coliseum to see the likes of the Beach Boys and Ray Charles.
The Beach Boys were like basically number one. And they played and they took a break at about halftime, about halfway through, whatever. We didn't know they were going to do that. They came out, walked out and went to the mics and said, "You folks look a little bored out there. Why don't you just fold up all those chairs and let's all dance?" And that's what everybody did. Everybody got up, started folding chairs and carrying them off to the side and cleared the floor. And we had a personal dance with the Beach Boys as our band for the night. So.
The 1970s reeled in rock legends like Black Sabbath, Journey, Van Halen, Kiss, Rush, and Southern rocker Charlie Daniels.
When Van Halen got out there, you immediately knew they were good. They didn't look like a band on their first tour. They didn't sound like a band on their first tour. And David Lee Roth, and he was the lead singer then, and Eddie Van Halen, they didn't perform like guys that were just out on their first road tour, and they gave it their all that night.
The Coliseum was not just hosting rock and country concerts. It also catered to a more religious crowd. The venue played host to evangelical campaigns and gospel concerts. In January of 1930, when New Harmony was struggling with flooding from the Wabash River, hundreds from the area flocked to the Coliseum for the first two meetings of a 6-week evangelistic campaign hosted by the famous Reverend William Billy Sunday. During his sermon, Sunday focused on topics such as denouncing the devil, college, and alcohol. 28 years later, one of America's most prominent televangelists, Oral Roberts, hosted a 4-day revival at the Evansville Coliseum. He focused primarily on his sermons, such as Demon Possession and My Life Story and How God's Healing Power Came to Me. Gospel concerts were also frequently hosted at the Coliseum throughout the 1950s and 60s.
When I was a little girl, my aunt took my mom and me to the Coliseum to see, it was the Happy Goodman family, I believe. It was a gospel night. And we went there like a couple of times, as I recall. They would have these gospel nights and bring in gospel singers and everything. The scenery there always fascinated me because it was, they were singing about heaven, and I thought maybe this is what heaven looks like, because it was such grand, it was like pillars, as I recall.
The floor of the Coliseum was the home to many different sporting events throughout its history. In 1946, a tennis match was held between Grand Slam winner Don Budge and 3-time major winner Bobby Riggs. Budge bested Riggs in their 3-set match with a final score of 9-7 in the first set and 6-3 in the second. Evansville College, which is now the University of Evansville, played its basketball games at the Coliseum until Roberts Stadium was built in 1956, which increased the fan capacity from around 2,500 to about 13,000. But the history of the games can still be felt inside the Coliseum when walking on the old wood floor. Arguably, the most iconic attraction throughout the Coliseum's rich history has been wrestling.
I used to go with my buddies, not every week, but probably 2 or 3 times a month on Wednesdays to the Coliseum wrestling. And it was just kind of a big social gathering. We'd go hang out and, cheer on the good guys and stuff. But yeah, we did that for several years at the Coliseum.
For over 100 years, the floor of the Coliseum has been transformed into the most iconic ring in the tri-state area.
The National Wrestling Alliance was the premier governing body for the sport from 1948 to about 1990. And you look at the list of NWA champions, there were only 3 who did not come to Evansville and wrestle at the Coliseum.
It has hosted notable wrestlers such as Macho Man Randy Savage, Jerry the King Lawler, and Stone Cold Steve Austin.
But so you'd have all those guys like The Rock, Hulk Hogan, Steve Austin, all those famous wrestlers that would come, and they would come through the Coliseum.
From semi-professional to WWE, the Coliseum has hosted some of the largest names and events in the sport.
It is basically the history of wrestling. In my books, I've jokingly referred to it as the Ryman of wrestling, because it is sort of the mother church. It is the place where everyone has been.
Over the course of time, as new public venues such as Roberts Stadium and the Ford Center were constructed, the Coliseum began its slow decline into ruin. Evansville began to neglect its original public venue, leaving the building to become a shell of its former glory, with history still etched into the walls. Today, the city is hoping to put forward around $25 million and a substantial amount of effort into restoring one of our city's original and best public venues to its former glory, which was first seen over 100 years ago.
And that's one of the things we wanted to make sure, is that the Coliseum did not go to the ways of some of our most historic buildings.
The renovators will attempt to restore some of the beautiful paintings that depict early settlement as well as industrialization in Evansville that have been stained by smoke and dirt over the years. They also plan to renovate the walls and floors that have, over the years, decayed and rotted away. With future renovations hopefully in place, the city of Evansville can look forward to seeing the Coliseum restored to its former glory. It may even be able to continue its legacy as a public venue for the next generation. Only time will tell of the Coliseum's future, but its past is one steeped in rich history as Evansville's original Mecca.
So, Joe, what types of renovations are needed? What kind of costs are involved? Are there structural concerns right now for the Coliseum?
No structural concerns as far as anything major. It's a very structurally sound building. But one of the things that we are going to be starting on Phase 2 this summer, that we're going to begin fundraising for, because this building is going to have to earn its keep to moving forward, and so is ADA compliance. As I mentioned earlier, the Honor Flight does use this, and many of those veterans are in wheelchair or such, and we have to make the bathrooms as well as a ramp. And we'd also like money to have an elevator so that we can utilize the bottom and the upstairs, but that takes money. And so, but that is going to be one of the big ones that we're going to get started on first.
So you're fundraising now. How far along are we?
Well, like I shared, the Coliseum with the county, we have $5.5 million that has now been spent. We have another $500,000 that we are working towards. November 1st, we're going to have a very large USO style of gala. The Templars are going to be playing as people come in, and swing dancers as people come in, and it's going to be like the old-fashioned 1940s band when they had it during the World War II. And then we do have a big band called the Gatsby that is going to be playing for the evening. And guest speaker is Brigadier General Stewart. He has a lot of success in renovating the Indiana War Museums in Indianapolis. So we look forward to that event.
With the short amount of time I have left with you, what is your final message? Anything you want people to know about the Coliseum? What makes you so passionate about this?
Well, this is a structure that's been neglected for many, many years, and this is for the community. This is for everyone. Everyone can be able to enjoy it. If anybody wants more information, we do have a Facebook page, the Veterans Coliseum Preservation Foundation. All the information on that will be on there, and they can watch our journey. And if they can help, that would be even better. We are always looking for individuals that can help us, whether it's fundraising efforts or having events. We welcome anyone.
Jillian Hahn, the at-large Vanderburgh County Councilor, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for the work you do for the community.
Thank you, Noah.
Thanks to Vanderburgh County Councilor Jillian Hahn for talking about the historic Veterans Memorial Coliseum in Evansville. I'm Noah Alata, Chief Communications Officer for the University of Evansville. Thanks for watching WNIN Newsmakers.